Good morning. We're in Ayin Beis, reviewing, summarizing the conclusion in the broader context of things. And we're on page 1369. Pages can be found. If you want to follow the text, the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. So yesterday I did pretty much a general overview of the general central themes of Ayin Beis, especially as they are defined in this section that we're learning about the interface of Torah, Mamayla Lamata, but in Torah itself, Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud, 3 levels of Torah, 3 dimensions, you can say, in Torah. One rooted in Chabad, and that's higher than Gilui and higher than Hasaga and comprehension, and therefore it manifests only in Asiyah, in story form, in action, without the details, without explanation. The second level is Mishnah, which is rooted in Chagas of Atzilus, and that therefore manifests not just in the Yitzirah, in a far more developed and revealed world. That's why in Mishnah you find all the details. So we were reviewing that whole general concept, and namely, on page 1368 began the Zohar that calls Mishnah Isasa, the Isha, the wife, spouse of Ahunar. What is this Ahunar? Of that young one. That young one, Nar, is usually referred to sometimes in Kabbalah as Matat, one of the angels. I'm not sure how he's going to determine it here, but bottom line, Nar, in this context, is Zoh. Zoh da Atzilus, which we're going to learn about now. But after the introduction, that Zokin, which is the opposite of a Nar. Nar is a young one, Zokin is the aged one, is the level of Atik or Chesed in general. That's beyond Kiddush and beyond change. It's reflective of the divine immutability, as we learned. And that's why you see indeed a Zokin does not get phased. His composure, his das, daite sosum, and he's capable of daite miyusheves. He has this what do we call it? This settled knowledge, and he's secure in his knowledge, in the sense that he's not mispol. So it's a higher level of das, in contrast to das tachten, which is connected more to the midas, the key that opens the door to all the emotions. So that's Zokin. Mashen kem b'china Zah. And now we're going to learn about Zah, the new paragraph on page 1369. Mashen kem b'china Zah, that's Atzilus. By contrast, Zah, Zohar Ampin, the small face of Atzilus, not the Arich Ampin of Keser. Keser is called a long face, Arich. This is a small face because it's on a smaller level. It's a less developed level, less mature level. Sheheina midas Chesed and Gevurah. Those are central part of Zah, even though it's 6 midas, but in general it's the midas of Chesed and Gevurah, of right and left. This is the bechina which God established, which the governance and the order of the world is governed from the level of Zah, the ilmus of Biyah from Zah. Like we said earlier, that the midas Zah is a shaychus ala ilmus. Chabad and higher Kesed, we should say, is above existence. It's above a relationship. It's more of a, when we say, for example, when a child is younger, they're very much all dependent on their family, friends, and we define ourselves as such. We define ourselves in subjective context of others. It's when a person really becomes established adult and they really have that security. We're talking about not just chronological adult, but also an emotionally intelligent and intellectually developed and mature individual, a sign, it's not the word I'm looking for, but as something that is a cornerstone to adulthood, is that there's a certain independence. You see yourself as an independent entity, not defined by the subjective interests of others, and even your own subjective interests. So, but midas Chesed and Gevurah, so that is the divine energy that is not engaging directly with existence. But Zah is the midas in B'chinas Zutali Seder Vanhogus Elam is Biyah. It's an interesting expression. It's actually from the Maimer of the Tzemach Tzedek that I referred to yesterday from B'yuri Azeir. Probably actually the Lashon of the Alter Rebbe himself. And that is Seder Vanhogus Elam is Biyah, dependent on the governance of Chesed and Gevurah. To use an example which will help us understand the next few lines, we talked about this a number of times. When a king is in his own inner sanctum, so then he's removed from his subjects, he's removed from the people. Think of a Rebbe in his own private room. He does what he has to do. But then when the king comes out to govern, to give instructions, to answer questions, to give counsel, and so on, that's already the king as he's relating to the others. So in the spherotic structure, the difference between Chabad or Chesed, I would say, and Chabad, in contrast to the Midas. The Midas are reflective of Zah, is reflective of the king relating and governing the world, and Biyah. And the levels higher that we learned about before Zokin is beyond that. So Seder Hanhogas Elam is Biyah, Ubebchinas Schar ve'Einish. And a level of schar and einish, which of course is reward and punishment, but I like to use the word cause and effect. But he's engaging. Before, remember, he spoke about Maisa Tachtenim does not affect him, it's not Negeya. There's no Spilus Vishinui, Maisa Tachtenim on the level of Zokin. Because he's removed, he's not affected by he's not affected by the changes and the shifts around him. Whereas a young person may be affected. However, Zah has to be affected by it because that's what Zah's role is. Its role is to govern. Its role is to mete out, cause and effect. And when a person behaves like this, there's schar. And when a person behaves like that, there's the opposite of schar, of reward. V'hainu, which means shinui. Shalapamim mishapich lemidas hadin. Sometimes, like the king is now sitting in judgment, so to speak, on a throne of judgment. Now he's listening to two arguments, and he has to make a judgment: who's right, who's wrong, who's guilty, who's innocent. So sometimes it's misapich lemidas hadin. It's transformed to midas hadin, to judgment, to a judgment. Kishalei huchshiru ma'aseh tachtenim. When the ma'aseh tachtenim, we're talking now, of course, Lamaila. I'm using the example of a king, but the same idea, Lamaila, when it's not befitting, when a person is not the Ma'aseh Tachteim, the actions below are not appropriate. Huchshir means like when you prepare something properly, it has to be prepared. The Keilim has to be, but if the Keilim is not prepared, then it cannot receive the blessing. So that's when there's Midas Hadin. So bottom line is that Zah, in contrast to Arich Ampin or Chesed in general, is absolutely related and engages with existence. We're soon going to learn a bit important qualification about this. But he's speaking now relative to Chesed. So the Nar relative to the Zoket, basically. Ulechein, and for this reason, Kol Ikrat Tefillah, the main primary function of davening. What is the purpose? What does davening do? Is to draw down from Arich Ampin into Zah. And because in Zah, we could be subject to maybe we will be rewarded, maybe we will be merit, maybe we won't be merited. But when you're mamshech in tefillah, you're going back to the source and you're saying, Hashem, have rachmanas on us. Yehi ratzon. That even if we transgressed, accept our tshuva, etc. So basically, tefillah is hamshach b'chinas arich ampin zah, v'hu inyan kesher ksarim l'keinei, hamshach is b'chinas aratzon. Davening is the idea of binding or weaving ksarim, crowns, l'keinei, to the Eibishter. So this is based on a medrash that says that when we daven, the angels take our tefillas, and from that they make crowns for God. Essentially, it's a way of appealing to Hashem. Like you bring a gift to the king to atone for our sins. That's what Chesed refers. That's called ksarim. Why ksarim? Crown, because the crown is rotzen. So you want to have hamshachas harotzen, that Hashem should desire us. So even though our behavior may not have been fitting, so in Zoh, we may be subject to Midas Hadin, but through Tefillah, we reach, like Moshe Rabbeinu, after the Chet Egel, after the sin of the golden calf, he davened, and he was Mamshech Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim, which comes from Keser. Just 1 second. Yeah, like we learned in the last page, that the lower part of the 2/3 down the page. That's what Tefillah does. But Zoh itself is in the world of engaging with the governance of the world, which includes the judgments and whether merit or are you guilty or innocent, and so on, innocent or guilty. Okay, so this is a general distinction between Zoh Ampin and Arach Ampin, between Nar and Zokin. He hasn't gotten to that language, Nar and Zokin, but that's the idea. However, the important qualification going to come now, that in truth, and this is also going to set up for something we're going to learn later on page 1487 and on, the true effect of Maisa Tachtenim is not in Zoh, but in Malchus. So relatively speaking, Zoh is already the beginning because it's Chesed and Gevurah. But he's going to explain now that Zoh of Atzilus, in truth, is also L'mayla Mishinui. I think I recall when we learned it the first time, I explained what I said yesterday, that the goal is to interface. That can we, mortal human beings, in a world of change and impermanence, can we experience the permanent? Can we experience the eternal, the immortal? And the answer is absolutely yes. That's the ultimate interface. To bring the Amshachas of Leishanisi, of immutability of the divine, into our mutable world. I don't know if that's an expression, mutable. Anyway, but you get the idea. Into a temporary world, into an impermanent world. So till now we've learned, okay, Keser is the world of Leishinu, ancient Leishanisi, like we said, Zokin, Atik, or Atik Hamshach and Arachampin, like he mentioned, but generally reserved in Keser, and Zoh now is the world of Midas, there is Shinu. But the truth is, we're going to learn now, since it's a Zoh of Atzilus, and Atzilus is all Elikus, that even Zoh is also not subject really to Shinui. And the Shinui comes in lower levels. Now you'll say, why are you saying that? You just said to me that Zoh is Shinui. Because, again, Chassidus is never linear. It's always trying to bring the highest levels into the lower levels. So first we established Keser and Zoh. But now we're saying even Zoh has an element of Leishanisi also. So that makes it even more accessible to us. So this is a common theme in Chassidus. Sometimes they'll talk about a certain idea and then say, but in truth, if you really break it down, even the lower level also has an element of the higher level. It's all part of the overlap of interfaces, that in a true interface, you always want to have that. You don't just have two things connect, but each one of them has a part of the other. So you could also go the other way around. Keser. Is Keser really Leishanisi as much as Atzmus, for example? Keser is after the Tzimtzum at the end of the day. At least Keser is of Atzilus. But then we talk about before the Tzimtzum. Before the Tzimtzum, there are levels. We talk about levels of Keilim Aleis. That sounds like Shinui. But we know it's not a Shinui because it's all conceptual and it's all levels that are not exactly levels. It's God's envisioning these levels. But you can subtly say even envisioning a level is different than not envisioning it. My point is that it's all depending on how our perception and our level is. Bottom line is only Mamish Atzmus is the only thing that's totally immutable. Everything else is a chiddush. Even Atik that we said Tachteina Sheba Atzmus, we still say it's Tachteina Sheba Atzmus. We don't say it's Atzmus, Mamish. So you don't use the word Shinui there because it carries the personality, the immutable personality of Atzmus, but it's all in a sense relative ultimately. I just want to make that clear so there shouldn't be any confusion on this topic. So now he's saying like this. So let's read this and then I'll stop for questions. Umakol mokim. And even though we just said that Zah is Chesed and Gevurah, Seder and Hogas Elemis, Schar ve'enish, and Lepamim Misapach Midas Adin, that sounds like Shinui. Gam b'chin Zah liyas sham hamtoke b'chsadim tamid. Being that Zah, because there's always there in Zah of Atzilus, the sweetening of the Gevurahs are always there, the Chesed, he's Zah rubei chsadim. So even though Zah has Gevurah in it and has the other Midas, but it's Rubei, it's primarily dominated by Chesed. Al Kain, Al Zen Nemer Gamkin Ani Hashem Leishanisi. That's why we can say also on Zah Leishanisi. The Atzilus B'chlal Ein Shayach Shinuyim Liyosei Etzem Elikus. That in Atzilus, in general, you can't really say Shinuyim because it's all Elikus. Even when Elikus manifests in a form of Gevurah, it's part of Elikus's role. So we think of it in this way. From our perspective, let's say Havai and Elikim or Chesed and Gevurah, Gilui and Helam are like two states. That's like a Shinui. Either it's revealed or it's not revealed. But from God's point of view, when he conceals, it's just as much his power as that when he reveals. And as a matter of fact, his concealing is part of the way he reveals. It's like a teacher who's not teaching everything he knows. He's regulating it. He's filtering it. From his point of view, the filter and the Gilui is all one. Havai Elikim from that perspective. So the truth is, if you think it from Elikus point of view, even though Chesed and Gevurah sound like a shift, but from Elikus, they're both flows of one godliness, of one flow of godliness. It's just, it manifests in different ways. So he wants to point out that when you talk about Atzilus, Elikus really is Maila Mishinui because it radiates the divine aspect of it. Now, Chesed and Gevurah in Bria is definitely going to take on, because Bria is already a Nivra. It's not a Elikus. As a Nivra, there is Chesed and there's Gevurah, and there is that aspect of difference. But so he's saying here, so on one hand, Zah compared to Arich Champin and Kesed, yes, is already in the world of Chesed and Gevurah, but in truth, he's saying, Atzilus b'chal ein shayach shinuyim. He's now going to explain what that means more in detail, and I explained why he's emphasizing this, because this makes it more accessible. Because the fact is that we can look at Chesed and Gevurah. So when you think of it, I remember people asking me when the Rebbe would write and respond to a question you ask. Am I working with the Rebbe on the Rebbe's talks? And he would answer in a sharp way. Sometimes the Rebbe answered quite sharply. He'd say, it's shocking what you're saying, or shocking that you didn't get it, etc. And in edits or in answering a question. So I was asked a number of times by people, were you in any way like, that it hurt you? Or you like felt embarrassed or felt hurt, felt somewhat humiliated? The answer is absolutely not. I actually also, because to me it was all education. I saw the Rebbe as Kulei Chesed, and part of Chesed is showing you how to write it and how not to write it. Think of a coach, Lahavdil, a tennis coach, and he's encouraging you to hit the ball a certain way. But then you do something a little wrong. He sees your mechanics are off. And he tells you, try this, try that. It's coming from the same loving place. There's no shinui. It's the same loving Rebbe who's giving you the positive feedback as the negative one, if you relate to it that way. But you have to be on that level, of course. Now, there are people who critique is personal. They do personalize it, and it's not the same thing. But we're talking about someone with Kulei Chesed, like in the world of Atzilus, of total Elikus. The Gevurah is just as Elikus as Chesed, and therefore, from that perspective, from our perspective, we may have to work on that to feel that type of unanimity, I guess is the right word, or singularity of the Chesed and Gevurah. But from the point of view of Atzilus, it's that level of Etzem Elikus, Shein Shaykh Shinuyim. That's the meaning behind this. However, as we're going to learn later, this doesn't mean that Zah is like Kesed. Still, Kesed is still higher than Shinui, much more than Zah is. Because Zah, at the end of the day, is Chesed and Gevurah. However, it's not a Chesed and Gevurah that shift because it's all Elikus. But it has now taken on two kavim. There are two kavim here. Remember we learned earlier, and we're going to learn about this, where he spoke about the difference between Mikra and Mishnah. So he said, Mikra is an akudah, flawless. But he said, but we know he asked the question, In Mikra, we also have mitzvah sesa and mitzvah leisesa. You also have Chesed and Gevurah. And you also have details. 248 positive mitzvahs, 365 negative. And the answer is because even in Chabad, there's also kavim. There's also structure, but it's not quite the structure as it comes down in lower levels. So in that sense, in Atzilus is not like Kesser, because Atzilus, there is a structure. However, the structure is divine. In a way, Atzilus is bringing the immutability of Leisha Nisi into a world that's beginning to be the root of the Shinuyim of Chesed and Gevurah will ultimately manifest as it governs Histalshalus, like he said, Seder and Hagas HaElemis. But from the king's point of view, as he's ruling from his perspective, there's no Shinui. But from the perspective of the recipients, there will be. So this is bringing Leisha Nisi into a lower level, just to clarify that point. But before I continue, let me stop if anybody wants to ask anything, because this is pretty fundamental stuff. He's going to explain it now in more detail. Now, this is taken from the Maimer of the Tzemach Tzedek, but the Rebbe Rashab is adding explanation to it. Any questions? Yeah.
No, go ahead, Elishava, please go ahead.
No, it's just I hardly understand anything, so it's really a quick, small question. When it says that Za is mostly Chasadim, in my mind, I'm kind of making up for that by understanding that the middle Kav is Koil Chesed also. Otherwise, I mean, but it also is Koil Gevurah. So how could you say that Za is mostly Chasadim?
He's not saying any middle Kav here. The fact is, it's a statement from Kabbalah in general that Za begins with Chesed and its primary power is Chesed.
Oh, because it begins with Chesed.
Okay. Yesod Malchus, Yesod, I should say, the six others. This is just a rule it's just a principle in Kabbalah and Chassidus that Za is Malech Sodim, or Rubech Sodim is the right word here. It's not because of Tiferes. We're not talking about Tiferes now. We're talking about Za. This is a rule that Za is Rubech Sodim. It has Gevurah because you also need to have Gevurah, but it's primarily it's a Sodim Dika experience of love and flow.
But mathematically, it's equal.
It's not Atzilus is not mathematics. Atzilus is the world of Elikus. So when Elikus is manifesting in the form world of emotions, it's primarily chsadim and the sweetening of everything because it's Elikus. Atzilus is the world of
the way I'll understand it is like it says in the Tanya, the beginning, the first letter of any word that pulls all the other letters along. So like Chesed is
there's an expression like that. It says Chesed. It says Azul. What's the lashon? Chesed Azul Chesed Kula Yemen. There's an expression like that in Zohar. That I don't know if that's the word that is the first one. Maybe that's why it's first. But yes, you can include that in explaining it.
What is Azil Chesed? What does that mean? Azil Chesed.
They're all the Yemim, all the 6 days follow Chesed.
Ah, okay. Azil means follow?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Or travel with, yeah.
My question is to understand this sentence, the statement that the primary, the motivation of prayer is to draw down from Arach Ampin into Za, presumably Dafka the Chesed.
Well, Za, like we just said, is Chesed and Gevurah and everything. But it's to draw down the Ratzon that we should so-called be forgiven, and it should not that any judgment should be nullified.
Right. So what I'm confused about is that I thought that we can't affect change above Atzilus. That we can only, frankly, affect change, or if you will.
Change, but we could draw it down. There's no change there, but we're drawing down that level into the world where there could be change and there could be judgment.
Mm-hmm.
We're drawing it down.
Well,
it's like opening the door. It's opening that door to draw it down.
Okay. Well, a separate part of I want to think about that. The separate question, meaning the difference between drawing down and trying to affect change. But in any case, second part of the question is, I thought that we our access uh, um to that which is even the Chesed of Atzilus, let alone Chesed above Atzilus, our connection is through Malchus of Atzilus,
We're
and
going to learn
that
that
is
later. We're going to learn that later, more detail. Right now, he's speaking in general terms, and we're going to learn that more in detail. Like I said, on page 1487,
okay.
he's going to break this down to a lot more detail.
Okay.
But for now,
Thank
whatever
you.
it says here is correct. There's nothing. The
This is
question is,
more macroscopic, is what you're saying. This is the more macro, and then
yeah,
when we get to the I see. Okay. Thank you.
yeah. Tefillah is going to be through Malchus ultimately, but he doesn't say it here yet. But Malchus ultimately accesses Zah, which accesses Arich, and the rest continues to flow from there. But now we've added that Zah itself, not just when it's drawing from Arich Hampin, is Rubech Sodim, and because it's there, because Etzem Alakus. Now he's going to elaborate a little more on this. He says, any other questions, I should say? Anybody else has any questions? Okay.
What page?
1360. We're on 1369. The be'eses spheres that Atzilus, that the 10 spheres of Atzilus had a air who air poshet. The air is a seamless light energy. And God forbid, you can't air poshet. There's no shinuyim. There's no changes. Gam ha-Keilim arehem b'chinas dveikus ba'er, and also the containers are attached and connected to the energy, to the light. The iyu v'garmui chad, because he, God, and Garmui and his Keilim are one. So I've explained this many, many times, but I'll just say it again. You have to keep in mind what I said earlier. Everything is relative. Atzilus, on one hand, you can talk about in context of a structure. Atzilus is not like Toihu and not like Akudim. There's 10 spheres, there's 10 energies and 10 containers. There's a structure. It's called Adam Elyon. The worlds higher than Atzilus have not yet shaped into a Adam Elyon. On the other hand, you could say Atzilus is Elikus. It is Elikus. It's Elikus, like the Tzelem Elikim, manifesting in that structure. So the question is, what are you emphasizing? Are you emphasizing the structural part, the Chachma, Bina, Chesed, Gevurah, etc., or are you emphasizing the divine part? And the answer is both. That's what a real interface is about. So the fact that Atzilus interacts with Biyah and ultimately will be the step that will help create existence, but Atzilus itself is beyond it. So Atzilus is a place where Shinui and non-Shinui ultimately are going to come to meet. Now, where that meeting place is, we're going to learn later. It's in Malchus, really. But here he's like beginning the explaining that first starts with Chesed, the Zaken. Then from there, you enter into the world of Chabad Chagas. And Chagas initially is Kavim. But now he's saying, but if you really think about it, Atzilus says the other side, it's Alikus. And Alikus, from God's point of view, whether he's doing Chesed or Gevurah, they're both godliness. So in that sense, if you say Chaz v'Shalom, it's a Er Poshet that doesn't have Shinui. Just keep in mind that balance. And remember, this is not a mechanical thing. It's not going to be black and white, where you could just establish this is here and this is there. It's constantly in a state where you have to understand both sides of it. There's no defined definition that you could say it's this and it's not that. It's a combination of both elements. That's why Atzilus is so vital, because Atzilus does have structure, and yet it's a divine structure. Bria is already a creative structure. Now, in the parentheses, I do want to read the parentheses, even though I've said that I'm not going to read everything, but there are some key elements to what we're learning now that I think are very fundamental to what we're going to understand later, and also in the bigger picture of the yichud of both yichudim. So let me go through the parentheses, which is the Rebbe Rashab's addition on the Tzemach Tzedek's Maimer. So now he's going to basically qualify and say, one second, there's a Maimer that says that the Begam, essentially the wound of an Avera, reaches in the Keilim of Atzilus. So earlier he brought the two Maimorim from the Alter Rebbe, Erdena and Noach. Where was it earlier? The 5 lines, the end of the last paragraph, where he talked about how the Zokin is not affected by the ups and downs, by the vicissitudes of existence. So he says in that Erdena Mavur, it's explained about Keilim da Atzilus Magia HaPagam. Then the containers of Atzilus, the Pagam. Pagam means literally injury or wound. Pagam means that when we, for example, to use the language of Chassidus Kabbalah, so when we have let's say your body is intact, a healthy body. So a healthy body is going to allow the flow of life, the life flow, your veins, your arteries are all clear, the circulation will be very smooth, seamless. If God forbid there's a begam, an injury in the body, what happens? The Keilim have an injury, so it doesn't let the flow of the light or the flow of life to flow through. There's a block, God forbid, a blockage, a clot, a growth, or anything that is getting in the way. So the same thing in Ruchnius. When we align ourselves through doing mitzvahs, we are cleaning up our act. We're basically a healthy human being behaving in a healthy way. So therefore, the life force of the divine enters us in a very good way. But if there's a begam, an injury, where's the begam? The begam is not in the oir, it's in the keli. The oir won't be able to flow properly, but it's the pipe that needs repair. So he says in that Maimer, it says that the Keilim, the Begam does reach the Keilim. We just read that Gamma Keilim are Dveikas Ba'er. So essentially he's like asking a question. In the Maimer there, the Begam does reach a Keilim that says Magib Avu B'chinas Yedeya, and that's the level of Yedeya. I'll explain what that means in a minute. Haynu B'chinas Slapshus. So this is what it means. There's two terms used when we say that God knows, God's aware of what is going on in Tachtenim. So the Pasuk Erdana, the Maimer is on Erdana. What's Erdana? V'roh Ktsas Kosa is talking about Zdoim. The wicked city of Zdoim were behaving in an atrocious manner. And the cries from the innocent that were being hurt by these wicked people in Zdoim, like Hamas, reached up to heaven. That's the Pasuk says in Pasha Vayera. So the Eibishter said, Erdana, let us go down below to see where this cry is coming from, to see what's going on down in Zdoim. So the obvious question is, well, God doesn't know from where he is. What do you mean he has to go down? Where's he going down from? Human being, you could say, you know what? You hear a cry on the ground floor and you're on the 5th floor, so you have to go down the steps to go back downstairs to see what's happening. But by the Eibishter, you can't apply such anthropomorphic concept. So the Maimer, the Alter Rebbe goes into a long explanation to the very concept, what is Atzilus? That's the Maimer. It's a very fundamental Maimer in Pasha Vayera, brought many, many places in Chassidus. You'll see it very often cited. Sometimes it's not cited, but the idea explains what is Atzilus. When you say Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai, where did he coming down from where? Where was he before and where is he now? So the answer ultimately is not that God comes down physically, obviously. It's two states of divine consciousness. The higher state of divine consciousness is called Yodua. It's known to him. When you say Yodua, means God remains, so to speak, quote unquote, in his own divine inner sanctum, but everything is known to him. Then there's a word called Yedeya, that he knows. Yedeya means Islapshus, like he says. that he's relating to it. So the first one is much more, he remains removed from all of existence, a state of transcendence, but everything is known to him because obviously he's God. God knows everything. But he's not engaging with it, so to speak, relating to it, both from his perspective and our perspective. So God is always immutable, no matter where he is. The question is, how much of it is he sharing with us? So when it says Erdana, it means God says, Anochi imei anechi b'tzara, I am with you in your pain. That's a very particular effort, where God says, I will not remain in my transcendent place. There's a dimension of the divine elokus, of godliness, that's Erdana, that manifests and in this form of islapshus. So when you say in Atzilus, the idea, is God affected or not affected? Or is there shinui or no shinui? That's what he's discussing. We haven't finished yet, but he's explaining. So the question is, so he says, so the Keilim, what he says that the Keilim there, the Begam reaches in the Keilim, that's because Erdana, because the divine that manifests within the Eris and within existence, within Erdana and within the evil of the world. So there the Begam could affect. There is a Begam that he says affect. I don't know if the right word is affect, but at least he says these words. Begam agia ha-Begam. He's moved from Yadua to Yedea. Not just it's known. Like think of a king who says, or you have this very common. Do you find this? I don't want to compare it to a president, but sometimes the king remains in his palace and he's told about a tragedy that happened in his kingdom. And there are times I want to go there to see it with my own eyes. I want to visit there. So at a human level, we understand that because no matter how much he gets reports in the palace, it's not like seeing it with his own eyes. But Kav Yochel, because the Eibishter wants, so to speak, to have a logical process relationship with us, so to speak, you have also these two levels. There's the way God sees things from a removed state, and there's the way God sees things in an engaged state. So not that he needs it to see, because God can remain in a level of Yadua and have Yedeya too. But that would be Kol Yochel. That means God can do anything. Obviously, God can remain, so to speak, in that transcendent place and experience it just like if he was there. That's not a question. But he wants us to be able to relate to that we should feel it, that we should feel, like the Rebbe explains a beautiful explanation where it said by Shmini Atzeres that after the long holiday season, Hashem says to the Eden, now that the season is coming to an end, Kosha alai pridaschem. It's difficult for me, your separation. So let's establish one more banquet, a Suda, one Suda that will spend like basically a goodbye banquet, that before you move on, after the holiday season, let's get together and experience one final union. The expression in the Medrash that Rashi cites is Kosha alai pridaschem. It's difficult for me, your separation. So the Rebbe asked, it should say Kosha alai pridaseinu, our separation. We are separating. Why does it say your separation? Because God never separates from us. It's only us because we don't see the godliness after the holidays. So for that, God is difficult for him that we will feel separate from him. So he says, let's spend one more day together so you'll have strength that even when you go off back so-called to your personal lives, that you shouldn't forget me then. Remember that we're always connected. I'm always connected with you. But that's from God's point of view. So that's why you have a world of Atzilus where God says, I will manifest godliness in a way that you can relate to. How can you relate to it? Through Chochmah, through Bina. From God's point of view, Chochmah, Bina, Chesed, Gevurah is all godliness. There's no difference. But he's giving us now tools. He's giving us a bridge, if you wish, an interface by which we can connect. Oh, by learning Torah, I connect to God's wisdom. By doing tzedakah, I connect to God's chesed. Mahu chanon, afata chanon. Mahu racham, afata racham. So we can emulate God's attributes through our virtuous behavior. So we have a place to meet. So this meeting point, from our point of view, is critical. That's why we learned that Atzilus is necessary. For us to understand God, to feel God, you need Atzilus. Not that God needs it, but for us to make sense of it on our terms. So basically, he's saying that's the theme, the essential meaning of what Atzilus really is. So he says like this. So therefore, So the fact that there's a begam that reaches, he says magia begam, the begam reaches into Keilim is because he's talking about the Yudea in a state of islapsus. But we still have to figure out. So is there shinui? Is there no shinui? And that's what he's going to continue to explain now. But I want to stop if anybody wants to clarify anything I just said, because it's a little deep concepts. And he's going to continue now and explain that there's a place where there is no shinui, but there's still something that relates to us. In other words, you can have the king completely transcendent, completely removed from us. You could have him completely engaged, but you can have him also in a place where he's there, but he still remains the king. He's still not you and I. It's still something that remains transcendent, even as it manifests in an imminent fashion. He's going to explain that now in the next few lines. So we could either wait to see how he explains that, because that may clarify any points that you may be wondering about. But I just want to give anyone the opportunity if they want me to clarify anything. Okay. So the Rebbe Rashab continues and says, "B'tzarich leimer."
Can I just real quick, this idea of Erdana, is that connected to this Inyan that you just talked about? The first question I asked, this Inyan of Hamshacha from Arich Anpin into Zah? No?
Not necessarily. I mean, whether when we pray and we're bringing Arich Anpin into Zah, is that a form of Erdana? I don't know. I mean, it's possible. I'm not sure, because Erdana
I just posted something.
Erdana refers to Zdoim. Zdoim is not Zah of Atzilus exactly. So what I spoke about was more coming down into the pain of existence. But is there an element? I mean, I have to think about it. I have to look in I don't know if the Mimer, maybe the Mimer may say something in the Erdana and Torah. I would have to see.
I just posted something from, I think it's the Mimer Torah. I'm obviously not asking you to look at it while you're teaching, but did I at least pick the concept from the right Mimer that I posted in the WhatsApp thread?
Let me look.
Because there seems to talk about some kind of Hamshacha.
I'd have to look, but it may, yeah. But look, the Maimer Erdana he's quoting here, so it's clearly again. I don't know if it's connected. You ask me if it's connected to prayer. That I don't know about. That I don't know.
Okay.
Okay. The Tzorach Leimer, the Atzilus Bechlal, Gam Etzad Keilim Hu B'chinas Siluk Levad. Okay. So now he's going to introduce yet another concept, that even though we just said that the Keilim are in a state of Yedeya, slapshus, Erdana, which means that the Pagam, that when something happens below, like an injury or a wound, through an Avera, through sin, through transgression, Magia reaches, the question is, how much does it affect? So in a physical sense, when I said before, let's say, God forbid, somebody has a physical injury, that's not a question of, there absolutely affects. Person that gets injured, and as a result, before there's a healing, it's going to affect the flow or going to affect the person. Now, the bloodstream or the heart may not be affected by an injury to one part of the body. So the effect is only going to be whether the blood will flow into that limb or that part of the body that's been injured. But you don't say that the heart or the rest of the body has been injured. You just say that place. So the question is, how, when we say there's an injury, how does that, what relationship does that have with the Keilim? So he's saying it's only in a form of Siluk, which means it didn't affect it. It just caused it to leave. So I think I gave this example when we learned it the first time. Let's say you're invited to an event, to a party, okay? And God forbid somebody behaves there in a very atrocious way. And it affects some of the guests to the point that they get hurt and insulted or embarrassed and so on. Other guests, it doesn't affect, but they don't want to be there when there's such negative energy, so they leave the house. So in other words, even an effect can have different ways of how something affects you. It can affect you by actually really hurting you, or it could affect you, it didn't hurt me, but I made a choice that I don't want to be in a toxic environment. So when toxins affect the body, let's say an injury, it could affect something and actually that thing will need to be healed because either, let's say, a fracture or a different type of injury. So that needs to be healed. But there are parts of that it doesn't affect directly, but affects that it leaves the scene, so to speak. So when a person has an injury and the blood cannot flow to that place for whatever reason, the blood can remain intact. And the blood in the other parts of the body can be intact. We're not talking about an injury that affects the whole body. But it can't flow there because it's essentially like electricity is not damaged when an appliance wears down. It just cannot flow into that appliance. So he's saying in Atzilus, the Keilim, even the Keilim, it's only affected in a form of Siluk levad. That's what he's saying. So when there's a sin, that healthy energy cannot be there while there's a sin. Not because it's been damaged, it just cannot be there, can't be in that area. So it removes itself, it's removed. Like he writes in the Pardes that he quoted before, and the Geras HaKedesh 20, the Madregas Atzilus mistalkish kisherotzu lachte b'terem yachtu, that the level of Atzilus was removed when they wanted to do a sin, even before they sinned. As soon as Atzilus sensed that there's going to be a sin, it removed itself, so to speak. I mean, Thad doesn't have its own will. That level of Elikus could not engage. It's like, that, let's say, people are plotting to do a crime. So it's not your effect. You just say, I can't be there. I'm out of here. That's the effect. So there is an effect, but it's not a direct effect. It's more of an effect of removing oneself from that state. So bottom line, it's like the Kedusha, we say Kedusha le'zazim imkema. Holiness never changes. It's like Leishanisi. Right now, there's holiness on the Temple Mount. That's why we're not allowed to walk there. The Kedusha Leishanisi, it's divine Kedusha. However, you don't have a Beis Hamikdash. The fact there's no Beis Hamikdash because the Beis Hamikdash was nostalgic, not because the Kedusha was injured. The Kedusha cannot be there in a manifest way in a building as long as there's a world of toxins. So, but the Kedusha doesn't go away in that sense. It's removed. Bottom line, there's no Beis Hamikdash, but that doesn't mean that something damaged, God forbid, the very Kedusha itself. It's very fitting to where we are right now in the 3 weeks. I just gave a class this morning about the Hasidic perspective on the 3 weeks, and I brought there a mashal from Hillel Paritcher in a classic mimer, that when a teacher wants to reveal a deeper revelation to a student, he falls silent to prepare himself. So the silence can be misinterpreted by the student as abandonment, but in truth, it's just it's a preparation of a deeper gilui. So not everything that seems like, so there's a situation where there's a real injury, like a sin, has impact. But the question on Atzilus, the impact he's saying, even the Keilim of Atzilus is in a form of Siluk, rather than a form of a Begam, that the injury has actually affected Atzilus directly. It's affected it to be removed, but not directly injured it. We'll soon learn more about the details of this, but this is part of this whole process of talking about the different Zaken and Nar, which we'll get back to, of course, as we continue on. So, just a second. Okay, any questions?
Is this, before I talked about a macrocosm, is this like a microcosm explanation of Hester Panim? What we're learning here, the Siluk here, is that related to Hester Panim, or are they completely different concepts?
Hester Panim is generally a concealment. That's what it means. The face is concealed. So the answer is, depending what you want to derive from that. In general, you ask me a general term. There's a connection between.
I'm saying we understand that because of our sins, there's a perpetual hester panim of.
I mean, are you
of the
referring to a
Eibishter.
particular mimer where you're using the word hester panim, or you're
No,
just referring
just
to a term? Yeah, I
in
mean,
general, the
in
concept
general
of hester
terms,
panim.
in general terms, hester panim means a face that's concealed. So it is a form of golus and concealment. So generally speaking, it's connected. Yeah. Answer is
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any other questions? Because I think I'm going to stop here because the next piece is a little more. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to stop here because the rest of it is a little more dense. Well, dense. It's a whole other piece. I don't want to start a new line without explaining it properly. So this is far from finished. He's going to talk about this more because the question then is, so when we say this Scharva Einish and Chesed and Gevurah, where is that taking place? Now, earlier you said it's in Zah, but now that Zah is Alakus, and there's no real Shinui there, so where does it take place? So he's going to explain it's how Zah manifests into Zah of Yitzirah. That's what he's going to say. That ultimately Zah is like Atzilus is the bridge, the interface between Atzilus and Biyah. So when Zah manifests in Zah in Yitzirah, that's where in the Mishnah Yitzirah, that's where Chesed and Gevurah really becomes a very dominant force. And there is, I think he's going to say Shinui, but we'll see the words he uses. I don't want to put any words in the Rebbe Rashab's mouth here. So we'll get through this. It's a little slow, but we'll go through it. So we'll stop here, middle of a parentheses, before the Yesh Lamer, like almost a little more than halfway down the page 1369. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let me stop the recording unless somebody wants to ask something that should be on.